Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to take a quick moment to say, if you enjoy these conversations and find them helpful, please consider hitting the subscribe button. And if today's topic resonates with you, I'd love it if you could take a few seconds to leave a rating or a review. It really helps the show reach more people who might need a little more inspiration or guidance on their own journey. Thank you so much for being here, for your support, and for helping us grow this amazing community. Now let's jump in. On this week's episode, I'm so pumped to bring back the incredible Dr. Alexandra Guhde, clinical psychologist with experience of almost 2 decades. That's a lot of experience. And if you haven't listened to the first couple of episodes with Dr. Alexandra, please check them out. Number one, you're going to get a really good background of her experience and the art of psychology, the art of therapy, also the science, but we really break down what it means to have a really great session, feel like you're really progressing, and seeing the therapist that is going to help you. So those are in the first 2 episodes that I've done with Dr. Alexandra. Go check them out. Today, we talk about language, the language that we use on ourselves, in conversation, around each other, and also Dr. Alex's experience and how she chooses words. But also, do words even matter? It is an incredible conversation. Again, she has, I'm going to say it, an incredible way with words that does help you to look at things in a way that you may not have thought about them before. And I think the most important thing about these episodes and these conversations with Dr. Alex is the fact that just hearing her experiences helps to normalize what we might be going through and make it an easier decision for us to open up and talk to someone. So please enjoy this episode with Dr. Alexandra Guhde. Alex, I'm pumped to chat with you again. We had an amazing conversation. We actually have had 2 amazing conversations.
We have, yes.
And the last one in this very room, thanks to you, I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Was all about trying to find the right therapist for you and trying to make that process and journey as easy and unscary as possible.
Yeah, if that's possible.
Unscary is a word. Yeah, if it's possible. And so I'd love to start now this episode with you and your process.
Yes.
In the beginning with a client for the first time, like how do you manage all of that on your end? What's happening?
Okay, great question. And I'll start with your unscary.
Okay.
Right? Because I don't know that it can be unscary, but I think hopefully the terror is worthwhile.
Oh, okay.
Right. And sort of how to listen to yourself through that terror and choose what feels like, move toward what feels healing. And on that, for the therapist, one of my favorite authors, who's a psychoanalytic author named Wilfred Bion. He lived a long time ago. He was a tank commander in World War II before he became a psychoanalyst. So he had experience with scary things. And he talked about the emotional storm of therapy. And he said that there's something wrong if in a first session you don't have 2 terrified people. Right. So a therapist is not supposed to enter the session feeling like I'm the expert. I already have an idea of exactly what this patient is going to need. This is this diagnosis, or, I'm so comfortable with this that I know it's going to be fine. Like you want, after some time as a therapist, you want enough comfort in the discomfort to know it's going to be okay. But you need to be ready. As a therapist, I need to go in there knowing I don't know. and really being comfortable being a beginner with this brand new person.
For someone who is looking to get therapy, I think that could be a really comforting notion, because I think, I mean, this is my mentality. I don't know what others think. I feel like some would resonate with this, but you know, we could be going in there feeling judged based on what we're going through, what's happening, how we explain things, what we say. So I think that's really comforting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, every person is different. So someone might, say to me, I've got a letter from my doctor. They say I have generalized anxiety, or I've got a letter from my doctor and it says I have OCD, or I've got a letter and I have PTSD, or I've looked it up online myself and I have 12 things. Like none of that tells me anything about the human being that's going to walk through my door. So what I'm looking for is just to be as curious as I possibly can about who is this person and what is being communicated. What are they telling me? Why now? Why me? Why therapy? How do they feel and what do they want to feel? So it's kind of scary for me too, because I want to help and I'm never sure that I can. And when I am sure that I can, I have to kind of second guess that. Because I might be, the phrase an empty set, right? Like I might be filling in the set with past information. Because the moment I think, oh, this is how the course of, treating panic attacks goes. It goes like this and then like that and then like that. As soon as I start to think, I know exactly what's going to happen. I need to stop and pay attention to that, because that might not be what's going to happen for this person. And I actually might miss something about who this person is.
I think that's something we all need to be doing. Not so much second guessing, but just, questioning what we think we know.
It's funny. I was just thinking, I had a friend call me up this morning, and she was actually the person who recommended my first therapist to me. I just realized that. Oh. So that was when I was 20, maybe 22 years old. And we've been friends for ages. She lives across the world from me now. And she said, I'm thinking about going back to school now. So she's a creative director and she's done fabulous things with her career, but she's thinking about where does she want it to go next. And she said, I think I'm going to go back to school and become a therapist. What do you think? And I said, I think you're going to be amazing, because she knows how to listen. All right. So she will refine that technique and she'll learn all kinds of things. But listening is such a rare quality, like really listening, not listening so that you can formulate your theory. And that's a complicated part of being a therapist. I do think that patients worry they're being judged the whole time. Like they're speaking about the most tender parts of their life, and they're wondering, am I hearing a list of symptoms? And then I'm diagnosing and putting them in a box and about to tell them everything that's wrong with them. And it couldn't be further from the truth. What's actually happening.
And that's so funny that you said then. I've realized that not only could that, or most probably is happening with a lot of people thinking that you're not you, but could be judged by the therapist, but also knowing someone is a therapist. And just like Marina and I were talking the other day, and just like in conversation, are you breaking down what we're saying, what we're doing, the stories we tell? Like even when it's not in a therapy room, that enters our mind. Do you know what I mean? So if it enters our mind then I can imagine that it can be a scary thought for someone to go in and, divulge the deepest parts of themselves.
I remember someone saying to me during one of my first placements in my training was at a hospital, and I was working with severely ill patients. And I remember about halfway through the year, supervisor, and like they had these little training courses for us, and so there was a group of beginning therapists. Right, we were so green. We were nowhere near finished our masters, let alone our doctorates, and we were just beginning this clinical work. And he said, "Look, I know you've had some coursework now. You've had some experience here. You now know enough to be dangerous. So we're not going to let you go into the room without an experienced clinician." And that was so wise, because there's a little period of time, right, where beginning clinicians can't stop, can't turn it off. Right? We got theories about everything. And that's, it's a wonderful and fruitful time, but it's also psychologically quite painful, because we're also diagnosing ourselves with everything, and we get really self-preoccupied and a little irritating to be around. And, I think so that doesn't come from nowhere, that fear about people. But I also think that one of the things that I've learned in this work is just like, I have an just infinite amount of respect for what everybody comes through. Right. So, yeah, like sometimes I see stuff, but when you see stuff, it's there for a reason. And that like everybody's so remarkable. Right. Everybody is. And it just becomes like maybe for me, it was a little bit like, in Wizard of Oz when Dorothy lands and everything's in color. It just feels like everything's in really vivid color.
In the beginning, you said the diagnosis, the ADHD, all of those things, they don't tell you anything about the person.
Yeah.
Obviously a diagnosis is going to be important in some cases, but do you believe there are cases where it's just unnecessary when, in your line of work, when you're working with someone?
Honestly, yes. In fact, I'd probably say in most cases, I think it's unnecessary. Now, we live in a world where that's not how the medical system works. So if you want to work well within the medical system, you need to be prepared to diagnose. And for some people, having a diagnosis is such a relief. And for other people, it's a confining box. And I do think it's important to be able to differentiate between symptoms. And so many, I don't know if you hear anything about like when what's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual comes out, when new versions come out, like they update it, they add new diseases, they remove old ones. They are fictitious categories, right? Someone's made them up. It's like economics, right? It's based in solid thinking, but it's not like mathematics where it's based out in the world. So you could just throw that out. There's actually a whole nother way of diagnosing, called the PDM. What's that one? The Psychoanalytic Diagnostic Manual, which is all different. But that one's not used by the medical world. So,
is there a reason for that?
Well, it was developed a little after the DSM, and I don't know enough about it to say for sure, but I think it was developed more a little bit against the system. So the system wasn't going to take it up. The medical stuff it's a tricky one, because I get asked a lot about, like, is it more art or more science being a therapist? And I think that there is a lot of science in psychology. And I believe that therapy is an art. Yeah.
So when you have someone who's come in and their language revolves around, I've got this, so this is the reason I do this, or the way I am. How do you manage that conversation with them?
Wow, I guess it depends on whether or not I think that that's dangerous for them.
How so? What does dangerous mean?
Dangerous might mean if someone's telling work they can't come in because of very serious mental illness, and then therefore everyone at work is going to now believe they have that very serious mental illness and that they might face prejudice, and they've self-diagnosed, or they've self-diagnosed in a way where they're, looking to receive medication that, is pretty heavy duty. I think that's pretty rare. People are mostly just trying to figure it out. So I don't tend to react too heavily to that. I'll just ask about, what makes you think that? What's it like for you? What are the symptoms like?
How important is language in your language, but also theirs?
Yeah. So look, the way I think of language in therapy work is it's talk therapy, right? That's what we do. We sit down and just like we're doing now, we sit down and we talk. But so little of conversation has to do with the words. And so little of the change in therapy has to do with the words. And yet they are the bridge. Yeah. They're the bridge. They are the barrier, right? They are the language. Like, we have to have a conversation because we don't understand each other.
They're the bridge, they're the barrier, and they're the box.
Yes. Yes.
I like that.
Yes. And they are, in a way, the crossing of the bridge, right?
Yeah.
I love the word metaphor. Because in some ways, therapy is just a metaphor. And a metaphor means to carry over, right? So a metaphor will carry or convey an experience from one person to another. Right? I remember I had one patient say to me once, I'm always headed for a green meadow, and instead I find myself standing in a mud puddle. And it wasn't like the most innovative metaphor, but it captured his experience so perfectly in that moment. It just hit us both. And then one day, months later, he had an experience. He said, I'm actually in the meadow now. And we both knew what he meant, and we felt it, and we cried together. Oh, wow. It was wonderful. And it was language is so important because it conveys experience. Not because some words are correct and some aren't. Like I said, you're trying to get as close to someone's experience as you possibly can with the limitations. So therapy's got some rules, right? Like, you're not supposed to touch your patients. Now, that touch in therapy is a whole other conversation, because there are some modalities where touch is really important. And I can't actually say reparent somebody. They can't move into my house. I can't feed them dinners, all of that. But there needs to be a conveyance of that experience, and that has to happen with words.
How careful are you with words? Because we can perceive what someone says in a different way than they actually mean it. So how do you?
I know. It took me. So since my background is actually in copywriting, so I had to be very careful with words. And it was, you've got 20 hours to create 50 words about something, right? That would be often a project of mine. So I was very careful. And then when I started as a therapist, it made me so tense in case I said something that steered things too much, or ran over someone's experience, or I got it wrong. And it took me a while, but I don't think I would have been able to do something like have this kind of chat. I just have to be myself. Yes. So even though it's the words that are the conscious vehicle, like so much else is going on in the moment, that like the talk is really a very small part of the experience, even though this is a paradox, or therapy is made up of paradoxes, but it is the talk is the thing that, like, when we can give words to something, right, we can be free. But as soon as we give words to something, we've imprisoned it in those words. So then we need to find yet more words and free it again. And that process just kind of goes on. It's kind of like cocoon, butterfly, over and over and over again.
How much is the words that we use intertwined in our identity? And is that a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
again, words, good thing, bad thing, correct, incorrect. But yeah, how much of that is part of our identity, and should we change, or, as we evolve or learn more, do we, like you just said, the cocoon, shed all that and fly?
That's such an interesting. It depends. I think words are more central for some people than for others. But I do think there are certain ways that we get used to describing our experience that actually really affect the experience. For instance, I once had a client who every written communication tended to start with the words, "I'm sorry."
Every single one?
Every single one. Every single one.
And
I'm sorry, but I need to cancel. Or I'm sorry, but I just need to check in that I understood you properly. And it really said something about his experience in life.
Wow.
That every initiating a conversation usually included, and this was in written communication. Like, he didn't enter the room apologizing every time, but in the written communication, it was, "I'm sorry, I'm taking up space." So,
do you sort of tell them that what you've noticed and what's happening?
This is the art, right? Is yes, you need to at some point, and the decision about when is important and how is important, because it's like, you can correct somebody, and then you've given them valuable information, kind of like a teacher with a red pen. But, they've done studies where they look at how people feel when they get their marks back from a teacher in red versus blue pen, right? A red pen is much, much worse. Does it going to be the same feedback?
Yeah.
So if someone's starting something with, "I'm sorry," there's probably some shame there. There's also a sense, and this is what's underground, which is wonderful and so confronting. If someone thinks that they have the capacity to disrupt your entire day by sending an email, there's also a kind of deep belief that they're really powerful, right? That their email could just rock you to the core, right? So you want to free that, like, we call that like a narcissism, but not in the pop psychology, like, we're not talking about an egotistical person who thinks they have the best hair in the room, right? Talking about like a belief in their vastness, and then a fear that their vastness is too much. So you want to free that person to take up space, but to do that, they're going to have to confront that they think they're so powerful. And that needs to then get balanced in with the rest of them. So, right, I'd say, like, there's an unintegration there, right? There's on the surface a smallness and meekness, and on inside a bigness, a puffed upness. And you want to mix those two together so you get someone who can just occupy their space and time.
Did they?
To a great extent, yes.
And did they? I have to know, did they start every email or written communication?
Well, what's interesting is after we began to talk directly about that, there were very few emails. Wow. So there wasn't, because something with the emails was also a fear to take up that space in the session. And that's not true for everybody, right? Like, there's, so don't worry if you're emailing your therapist that you don't. Exactly. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? The analyzing it.
Yes.
That's not for me, like, this conscious second thread that's running through all my sessions. Like, I'm not analyzing you right now. It's not something I like, it's not like I've got like a little drug sniffing dog in my brain,
Yeah, it's tiring.
It is
consistently on all the time, picking that up. You don't want to be doing that.
I think it's sort of well, I can only imagine this because I was never any kind of great athlete, but I imagine like for a dancer or for someone who does something physically very complicated, at first there's a conscious effort that has to be put into it. And then there's, once it's learned, it gets integrated into just being.
Yeah.
And then you can call it into response when you need it.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, it was the first time we spoke. You mentioned the differences in the clients of your American clientele base and the Australian clientele base. And you found it interesting, the language we use and the differences.
Yes.
And also, I guess, kind of the words that we would use that you didn't understand really, like what was trying to be said.
Yes.
So I'd love to know, in your experience, in terms of language, how do you go about either deciphering what's being said or breaking down what's being said so that the communication is really clear and you've both got an understanding of what's happening?
Okay. So I think, it's funny how used to I am now working within the, like, sort of the Australian psyche and collective. It is different. And there's a lot the same, but because we all have more in common than we do what separates us. But there were a few things I noticed at first. And I just want to say, and maybe we can kind of circle back to this, that, as much as the words do matter, usually people are coming into therapy to try to express something inexplicable and inexpressible as yet, like something that does not yet have language. So finding the language, I find that really fun. Like, that's for me very exciting, to be present with someone as they're discovering a language for their own experience. And then as I'm learning to kind of slot my language into that. So I do speak differently with different patients. And there's simple things. Like, if someone doesn't swear, I won't swear. And I don't want to disrupt their experience with curse words if they make an effort not to curse. If someone swears a lot, I usually swear more.
Yeah. Is this like mirroring?
Yeah, kind of. Sort of mirroring the tone.
The tone, yeah.
And it is in terms of like what reaches someone. So if they're trying to reach me with a lot of cursing, chances are I'm going to be able to reach them doing the same. There are occasions, I can't actually think of any off the top of my head, where I might consciously differentiate my speech, but I can't think of any. I do know that people are intrigued by the different way I speak as an American, and that sometimes I think that helps people feel safe because I'm a little bit standing outside of the circle. So they can tell me things that maybe they're not comfortable sharing within the circle. But one of the biggest things that I noticed when I first got to this country was the word chat. The number of times my clients or patients, whatever you want to say, called our conversations chats. It's a good chat. It's nice to have a chat. It's always good to have a chat with you. Well, I'm not sure that was the best chat today. And it's so casual. And it brought back a time when, during my training years, where I had a very formal, very formidable supervisor, and one of my American clients called the therapy chats, and she said, "What is with this devaluing of the therapy?" And it did stand out because it wasn't common. And so her, as I heard that my first months in this country, like, her voice kept coming back to me, and I didn't feel there was anything hostile in it. But I do think that there is something in general, I'm speaking very generally here, in the Australian psyche that this is, let's be cautious about dependency. Right? Let's not, because, nobody ever calls me doctor. And there were a lot of patients that didn't call me doctor in America, and I don't care. But there would be a lot that did. Even though I would introduce myself as Alexandra, there would still be people who would prefer to call me doctor. And here they only ever get it ironically. What's up, doc?
Yeah.
And so there would be that, and when I first heard she'll be right.
Yeah.
Or it is what it is. Or someone tells me they're feeling flat.
Yeah.
That was one. It took me. I was like, you got to explain that to me. Like, I don't know what's flat. What does flat mean? What does it feel like to be flat? Because flat's not a feeling. That's like when and it's usually women, not always, but usually tell me they feel fat. Fat's also not a feeling. Or weird. Weird. What's weird? Weird could be anything. I need to understand what weird is for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said it's about using language to describe the
ineffable, did I say? Indescribable? Inexplicable?
That's the one.
To explain what's unexplainable. Yes.
That. Exactly. So how do you take someone on that journey, especially when they, if there's no words to describe it, how do you know it's there?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. Maybe I could tell you about a case that.
Please.
Yeah. Because it part of it is about discovering where it is, right? Like what it is, what are we looking for? What is wanted? What is rent inside that needs healing? And there's a case that comes to mind, and this was a long time ago now, and just so your listeners all know, when I talk about cases, they're heavily disguised. So, but this someone came in for therapy. They wanted just for me to give some assessments. Like, so could I give them some like take home quizzes, basically, that they could go home, complete themselves so they could find out what was the matter. And I said, no, I didn't have anything like that, but they could come in for a session. And so this guy came in, and he, I had a couch in the room and my chair, and then a broken like desk chair in the corner that I was going to throw it away, but I hadn't gotten around to it yet. And it was pushed back against a window. It was really far from my chair. And so I opened the door. I welcomed this client, this lovely young man. And I gestured to the couch. And he walked straight to the chair, to this broken chair, which was what had happened to it. It was like it was missing bolts underneath the seat.
Oh, God.
So it was very wobbly.
Anxiety.
and noisy. Yeah. And he went straight to the chair. And before I could say anything, just sat right down. And it held, right? It kind of leaned. And he didn't seem to notice. He did not seem to notice at all. And he sat down and he just kind of stretched his legs out and asked where we start. And when I asked him, what he was looking for, again, he said, he thought maybe he was struggling, and if he had did some tests, then maybe he would understand why he was struggling. And I again said I didn't have anything like that. Maybe we could just talk and I could try to understand him, and maybe we would learn a little more. And from there, the process, the way it unfolded, right, is that he had to learn to stay with the feelings. And once he could stay with the feelings and tolerate the feelings, then it could take shape. So the way that worked in session, right, and this is maybe a good one to talk about, because this wasn't about anything special that I said. I have no memory of what I said in that, except at the end, like being very nervous the entire hour about whether or not he was going to stay in therapy or whether he was going to find the session completely useless. And, at the end of the hour, he gave me a very Australian phrase, being willing to, because I said something about, like, how did the talking feel today? And he said it actually felt not too bad and kind of nice. And I said, did he want to maybe try it again with another session? He said, not here to fuck spiders, eh? And for me, sorry, I happen to know that expression. because my partner uses it a lot. And the first time he said it was at a dinner party in California with all my friends. And we all just looked at him like, what? What does it? And talk about metaphor, right? It was like, let's do the impossible.
Yeah.
Let's do the impossible. So we did. And this was a part of it, where, with the intuition, I just had a feeling he needed that chair. Right? I was going to throw it away, but I decided not to throw it away. And what I did is I kept it in the closet. And every time he came in for a session, I'd wheel it out and stick it in front of the window. And he would just walk in and sit down on this like broken, crooked chair and talk to me about how broken he was. And it was heart-wrenching at times. Like it was beautiful. But what he was trying to talk about was the creativity that he felt inside. And he grew up in like this family of accountants and had followed suit. And, like things were on the surface going well, but he was not living in a way that was true to himself. And that this creative part in him, he wanted to paint. He was a beautiful painter. As he started to talk about that, and as he started to bring in paintings to show me, which was just wonderful, he just started to come alive. And the words would just flow, and we'd have these conversations. And then one day, I got the chair out, put it in front of the window, and he came in and sat on the couch. And he said, I thought I'd change it up today. And it wasn't too much longer before he was done after that. Yeah.
That must have been such a win for you in that
moment.
Oh,
I was so happy.
We're done. We're good.
Yeah.
We made it.
And it never, we didn't, I think right at the end of the therapy, we did speak about it. And as I did bring it up and say, I felt something change when you decided to start sitting on the couch. And he said, I felt comfortable being a little more close. And that was itself a metaphor, right? It's like the emotional connection to himself, to people around him, because he also, we talked about more than just his career, but, he also started to open up to friends and family and find acceptance in places he'd been sure there wasn't going to be acceptance. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. I want to talk more about language, but I have a question, because you said he came in and he wanted a quiz.
Yes, he wanted a quiz.
Yeah,
yes,
so that he could figure out what was going on.
Yes.
And I know we touched on this in the last episode where, we spoke about homework.
Yes.
Recently, I was talking to someone who was going to see a psychologist, and these were the words they said, because they found it expensive, but they're going to go to the session, get an action plan, and then that's it.
Uh-huh.
I'd love for you, like, what are your thoughts on that? I can guess, but what would you say to that person?
That might be enough for now for that person.
Yeah.
Right? That might be as much as can be tolerated.
Yeah.
And it is expensive.
Yeah.
If I'd known when I started my own therapy how much therapy I would be doing and how much I would spend on it, I wouldn't have gone. I would have thought there's got to be some other way. So I understand that, of course. I think, our pain is relational pain, though, right? We're not born separate from other people, right? Like the ones who love us are also the ones who inflict pain on us. So I don't see how you heal that by yourself. I think there's a lot you can do, things that are creative, for instance, that can be very healing. There's so many things that can be therapeutic. And there's a beautiful article I love by Emmanuel Gent, who is another psychoanalytic author. He was based in Canada, but he writes about the difference between submitting to something and surrendering. And he says you can choose to submit. Submission gets you nowhere. And submission does not help you grow because you're choosing self-abnegation. You're choosing to stay small. But when you surrender, you let go and you expand. And he said quite beautifully, I thought, you can surrender in the presence of a therapist, in the presence of a lover, of a friend, of a tree, of the sunshine, like as long as you feel open to the life, right? So you don't have to have, like, not everybody needs a therapist to heal. But if you don't need the therapist, I don't think a therapist is going to be able to give you a plan. Because first of all, I didn't give this guy a quiz. I don't tend to do that. I know very often if you go get a mental health care plan with a doctor, they will give you, they'll give you a quiz. And it's either the K10 or the DOS that will give you a kind of score. In America, it was often the Beck Depression Inventory. And it will tell you, like, are you stressed? Are you depressed? Are you anxious? It's a very easy test to fool. So if you think that the doctor's not going to give you a plan unless you come out stressed, depressed, and anxious, you can just answer the questions that you're stressed, depressed, and anxious.
But even if you're an honest person and don't do that, like, you're then putting giving them the power to tell you whether you need help or you're in a bad enough state to go and see someone.
Yes.
And that then diminishes everything that you feel and are going through.
Yeah.
And that in itself is dangerous.
Yes. I understand a minimum standard, right? We want to see, do people feel better, right? Does therapy help? And one of the things that is tricky is that very often people will say it's helping and they don't seem to be getting better. And then the question is, well, is this not good therapy, or are they struggling so much that it's going to take a long time? And, I know it's expensive. I also think if someone, we can go further with company. If you think about a coach, right? Like, a coach is there to encourage you along the way. They're there to teach you things, but that encouragement. I remember the first time I ran a marathon and someone who ran a bunch gave me a tip. And I was not going to listen because I thought it was the corniest thing ever. But I was actually going to run it with my sister, and she pulled out, and it was like, so I was going to be by myself. And this first time I've done this. And so I thought, I'll take this friend's advice. She said, put your name on your shirt. Because if you put your name on your shirt, people will cheer for you, and it will feel good, and it will lift you up when you hit the wall.
Yeah.
And it did. And it's sort of, we say that, like, friendship does that, but it's different. The thing about a therapist, right, is that they're not a friend. That because you pay them money, they're not theoretically needing anything else from you.
Yeah.
Right. So they don't have skin in the game. And that's important. And yet it's not a real relationship, but it is a real relationship. And if a relationship has done the damage, it needs to be relational to heal. There is a book, I think it's called The Way to Do the Work, or How to Do the Work.
I'll Google it. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. I'm actually not recommending it.
Oh, okay. We won't Google it. We won't put it in the show notes.
but I thought it was an interesting attempt. I read the beginning, and then I actually couldn't go any further with it. But it was, and it was a woman, I think, who's a therapist herself, who basically, so her premise is that, therapy is very expensive, and therapists don't know more about your life than you do, which is true. So you don't need them, and here's how you do the work by yourself. I just don't believe it's possible.
Why don't you believe it's possible?
Because I don't think you can do relational work alone.
Okay, tell me more.
Right? Like this guy that came in and sat in the broken chair, he was lonely, and he wanted some reading materials and some sound information to take home to cure his loneliness. Well, you can't cure loneliness by yourself in a room. right? Actually, what you need to do to cure loneliness is relate. And that's what the therapist is there for. If someone is at a place where they're well enough to get a pep talk that says you need to go join some clubs, join a team, be part of a book club, volunteer somewhere, and someone goes out and does all that, and then they feel better, well, they don't need therapy anymore. But it was that somebody, a human being, sat with them and recommended it. It wasn't the advice, because it would be shocking to me if someone didn't know that already. Yeah. Right? It was the encouragement they received from a human being. So that's another thing my dear friend asked me this morning is, it's like, is therapy's day, has it passed? Is AI going to replace therapists now? Is she looking to join a dead career? I said, look, I don't think so, because AI can't actually keep you company. It can give you good information. And I have like very savvy clients who will ask ChatGPT. They will fact check me with ChatGPT after sessions, and or seek to go further with the topic that we've discussed using ChatGPT. And they get interesting responses, but then they want to tell me about it because they want the presence of another human being. Yeah.
That connection.
Yes. Yeah. To be heard.
With AI.
Yeah.
Weird.
But you can't
said that. I can't imagine that being a thing.
Well,
because therapy to me is talking with the person.
You know what's interesting? And again, I don't remember where this experiment was done. It might have been Japan. They make these cute little robot dogs. They look like little dogs and they cock their heads. And the dogs have learned to cock their heads for us, right? They're trying to figure us out. And I think I read somewhere that they're the only species that we know really does that. Like cats don't do that.
Yeah, cats don't give a shit.
No. Cats just we work to understand them. That's how it works, right?
Exactly.
But
you get me.
Yeah. But dogs, they try. And we love it. Right? Who doesn't love it when a cute little puppy looks at you that way, right? It's like, oh, look, they're trying to understand. Yeah. And we feel good. So what they did was they gave like elderly people who live alone these little robot dogs, because you don't have to feed them. You don't have to walk them. They're just adorable and they listen. And they're not really listening, but they look like they're listening. Yeah. And then they gave them quizzes and they worked. They made people feel less lonely.
But I'm not going to walk into a room for therapy with a robot person.
No.
No. I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But like bringing it back.
So what I'm saying with that, right, is that the power of our projection is intense, right? Like it is the way we imagine we are understood. So there is I think there's this really interesting, potentially very dangerous space opening up in AI now. And I'm no expert at all in AI anything, where if we think that ChatGPT understands us, then we do feel more understood. But what we don't get from that is someone who actually understands. So that's the gulf. That's the difference.
I don't even know what to think about that.
I know. It makes your head spin, doesn't it?
It totally does. And I'm also afraid of that.
Yeah.
That sounds, I mean, that's encouraging human disconnection.
Yes.
If the way everything is going, like everything is AI, like I can't imagine, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I don't. I can't. Sometimes I feel in my line of work so old-fashioned because I think about it. I don't have my phone out. I'm not on social media. I'm not interacting with my computer much beyond like doing writing or writing my notes, right? So which is a very old-fashioned way to use a computer. I use full sentences in my texts. That's a place where language is important, right? Because all my younger patients, right, they do not do that. And all my older patients do. And I have to figure out I don't want someone to think I'm yelling at them because I've used a comma.
Yeah.
But I also feel that there is a kind of like, therapists are a little bit out of time, right? We are an old-fashioned kind of force in the world of like a slow down force, rather than a force toward entropy.
Entropy.
Expansion in the universe,
Okay.
chaos.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
You said the difference between the younger generation and the older generation.
Yes.
Older generation using full sentences.
Yes.
Is there a difference then in terms of the language being used? Do you find that maybe the older generation have more vocab, have more, not so much insight to how they feel, but like
they have the vocabulary.
They have,
yes,
to describe.
And it's such an interesting, in some ways, I got interesting feedback when I told friends in California that I was moving to Australia, and some saying, "Oh, there's so much sexism there. Like it's so old-fashioned in terms of gender." Well, in some ways, in some ways, but again, I think the difference is they're more than semantic. They're more than just words, but there's also a clarity and a directness here that doesn't happen, because I wouldn't say that sexism doesn't exist in America.
I can't say that it doesn't happen anywhere. Like,
no, exactly.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And here, I mean, I don't think the postman, who was not called the postman in America, would ever call me love in America. But that happens here, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of openness. And I actually quite like how there's less shame and hiding around beliefs that people hold. And whereas with the language can obfuscate, it can hide things. If someone knows how they're supposed to feel, they find the words for how they're supposed to feel. And that can be, and this is going to sound like terribly stereotypical, and I want to stress that it is absolutely a generalization. A big difference between working with men and women.
In Australia?
Anywhere.
Anywhere. Okay.
But in Australia particularly, is that women know how they're supposed to feel. Because women, there are a lot of expectations. Girls, and it still happens, right? Girls are praised for sharing and caring and giving. And boys are praised for doing and for being unafraid. So men know they're not supposed to be afraid and they're supposed to do stuff. And women know they're supposed to be nice. So very often working with women, there's a whole layer to lift off in terms of how they've learned to define themselves. And they've done it very thoroughly, right? Women do, and I don't know who I'm citing here, but I'm pretty sure I'm accurate. Vocabulary in general is a little larger. And the emotional vocabulary is larger. So women have more access to more complex emotional experiences and are sometimes more tangled in them. Mm. And for men, those experiences were never allowed to surface. So it's a matter of like prying open a steel box. But then once you do, what's inside is fairly straightforward. Mm. It's feelings. It's feelings they didn't know they had. And they haven't learned to twist them into anything else. They, in fact, just haven't learned to feel them.
Wow.
So there's a simplicity to that. The hard bits up front with the prying open the box.
So is that easier to work with, in a sense?
It's different.
It's different?
I find, for whatever reason, that I've always been drawn to working with men. I enjoy it. I enjoy that, that kind of standing in the mud puddle but swimming in the deep blue sea kind of experience where they discover so much within. I really like that. Yeah. And I really like how much change that can bring at home.
Yeah.
Because that's actually, I would say, the biggest difference I've noticed in my practice across the last maybe 10 years, but particularly a shift that happened around COVID, is so many more men are coming in for therapy.
Yeah, wow.
And my practice is probably 50-50.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes even more men than women. And that was absolutely not the case when I started. It was maybe 10, 20% men coming in for therapy, and half of them were coming in, as half of a couple.
Yeah. So we're talking about, the differences, generational differences, Americans, Australians. I'd love to know how does cultural differences come into it, especially with language, but I guess even like the stereotypes that they might, or the myths around therapy, like how do you manage the cultural differences in the clinic? Sorry, clinic. It's not. Is it a clinic?
Yeah, I have a practice, but I've also worked in clinics.
Okay. Yeah. So, culturally, how much do you have to be aware and sensitive?
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no.
Of course, you've got to be sensitive to no matter.
I think this is a hot topic and a difficult one to talk about, because I think in some ways we've gotten more black and white in our thinking over the last few years about how we speak about difference and otherness and togetherness and unity. And I think things are oversimplified now. And I think this social media is a big part of that problem. There's only so much subtlety that can be conveyed in a couple of sentences or a meme. But, one of the things that I think is interesting is the school I trained at was in the Bay Area in California. So one of the most culturally diverse parts of America. And we had a year of what they called then cultural competence training, and what is often now called cultural humility. And that's a big difference. That's a big change. Yeah. And I think that could mean a couple of different things. I think to be humble is important in this work, right? To be, in some ways, I think the best a therapist has to offer her patients is to show that it is okay to be a beginner by being one herself. Because we want to keep becoming in life. So we encounter beginning after beginning after beginning until the end. And I think that's the best way for life to go. In which case, it doesn't matter if someone looks exactly the same as me and has the same background, which is never going to happen. They're not the same person. So to be able to be humble and not know and ask, and at the same time, it's a fine line between burdening, like what part of their story does your patient actually want to tell? They might not want to explain their cultural background and history to you so that you can understand them best and become more competent and work better with people of their background. So I think it's a very tricky one to talk about. But the way I approach it in my consulting room is to ask questions. And that's actually, for me, was a difficult part of my training, because I grew up in a home where if you asked a question, you showed you didn't know something, so you're not supposed to ask questions. And so I had to learn to be brave with my questions. So I ask questions when I'm curious. So if there's curiosity, I work up the courage to ask a question. And sometimes it's really easy. But to ask questions and to check that I'm understanding. Am I getting it? I remember one time a client who was of Lebanese background said to me, and I found this so fascinating and helpful. He said, what I want to say to you, I have to say it in English. And in English, it just sounds like shouting. It loses all the color. So sometimes what I'll ask a client to do is to please feel free to, if they need to say whatever they need to say in their native language first so they get the feel of it, if it feels different. And then, yes, fill me in English, because I don't have access to other languages. But again, it needs to be embodied. So someone's emotional language, there's no two are the same. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible.
Mm.
Do you get Do you get a feel of the feeling when they're speaking their language?
I do. And it's, that is, I'm also so appreciative of the trust someone puts in me to have the courage to do that. Because I know, I don't know, it's vulnerable, the therapy process.
Totally.
Yeah.
Alex, this has been amazing.
No, thank you, Jackie.
Yeah,
It's been my
appreciate
pleasure.
you so much. I appreciate all the conversations, all the questions that you answered so beautifully, and I've always got a million more, and I just love chatting with you.
No, thank you so much, and likewise, it's a mutual feeling.
Another incredible episode with Dr. Alex. I love chatting with her. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you found it helpful and know someone who would benefit from hearing it, please send it to your friends and family and rate and review the episode, because that really helps the show to continue to grow. As always, stay awesome, and we'll catch you in the next one.